February 22nd, 2026, 4 in the morning, the Sierra Madre Occidental, Jalisco, Mexico. Somewhere in the black above a village with no name on most maps, in a compound carved into the mountain like a scar, the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere is sleeping. Two governments have been hunting him for over a decade. The DEA has posted a $15 million bounty on his head, one of the largest in the history of American law enforcement. Interpol knows his name. CIA drones have passed over his country, and still for 12 years, this man has been a ghost. Fewer than 3 confirmed photographs of him exist. All of them old, all of them grainy. In every classified file, every intelligence briefing, every wanted poster circulated between Washington and Mexico City, the same blurred image of a face that no camera could hold. His name is Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. By sunrise, he will be wounded and bleeding inside a military aircraft, dying somewhere above these same mountains. By nightfall, 6 states will be burning. This is his last 24 hours. And to understand how it ends, you have to go back to where it began, to a bar in San Francisco, 1992, and a choice that one man made for his brother. 1966, a village buried deep in the mountains of Michoacan, Mexico. No electricity, no paved roads, a place so remote that most maps don't bother naming it. That's where Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes came into the world on July 17th. He never made it past the 5th grade. By the time other children his age were still learning to read, he was in the fields, picking avocados under the Michoacan sun. One of 6 brothers in a family that had nothing, in a region where the 2 things that grew best were avocados and organized crime. He was gone before he turned 20. Crossed the border into California without papers, without a plan. Just hunger and whatever combination of stubbornness and desperation moves a person across an invisible line and into a country that doesn't want them there. He was arrested in San Francisco in 1986. Stolen property, a loaded firearm. The booking photo shows someone who looks barely old enough to shave. Not a kingpin, not a threat. Just another undocumented migrant caught in the wrong place. They deported him. He came back. 1989, arrested again. Narcotics this time. Deported again. He came back again. There's something in that pattern worth sitting with for a moment. 3 trips across a border that kept rejecting him. 3 deportations, a man with no money, no education, no legal status, and no obvious future. And still he came back. What drives a person to do that isn't courage in the conventional sense. It's something harder to name, something closer to a refusal to accept the shape of the world as it was handed to him. That same refusal would one day build an empire spanning 40 countries. But in 1992, he was still just a 26-year-old running low-level heroin in the Bay Area with his older brother, Abraham. And one night, the 2 of them walked into a bar. And everything that followed began with a stack of bills that looked too clean. September 1992, San Francisco, the Imperial Bar, on the rough edge of the Tenderloin. 2 brothers walked in to close a deal. 50 grams of heroin, $9,500. The buyers laid the bills on the table, clean, flat, stacked with a kind of precision that street money almost never has. Real drug money is crumpled. Real drug money smells. Real drug money doesn't come in neat parallel rows, Nemesio noticed. He leaned toward Abraham and said, "These men are cops." We walk away. He was right. It was already too late. 3 weeks later, federal agents arrested both brothers on drug trafficking charges, and it was in a courtroom, not on a street corner, not in a compound in the mountains, that the decision was made that would define the next 33 years. Abraham already carried 2 felony convictions. A third would almost certainly mean life in federal prison. Nemesio looked at his brother, and then he told the court to give him the time instead. 5 years. He served 3 at Big Spring Correctional Center in West Texas, a federal prison built specifically to house undocumented immigrants. He went in for his brother. He was deported in 1997, 31 years old, a convicted felon, banned from the United States for life. Most men in that position disappear. They get absorbed into the margins of whatever country takes them back, and the world moves on without noticing. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes did something no one anticipated. He became a police officer. He joined the local force in Cabo Corrientes in Tomatlan, Jalisco. He wore the uniform. He carried the badge. And DEA Special Agent Kyle Mai, who would later lead the American investigation from Los Angeles, was direct about what that period actually meant. Mencho wasn't rehabilitating. He was studying, learning how law enforcement thought, how it moved, how it could be bought. Every shift was intelligence gathering. He left the force. He joined the Milenio Cartel as a sicario. And when the cartel fractured, when Nacho Coronel was killed in 2010 and the Milenio leadership collapsed, he didn't fracture with it. He looked at the wreckage and saw an opportunity. He partnered with his wife's family, the Gonzalez Valencia money laundering network, and from the ruins of someone else's empire, he built something entirely new. He called it the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG. The question most people never think to ask is this: what kind of man chooses to go to prison for someone else and comes out the other side more dangerous than when he went in? 1997, deported back to Mexico, 31 years old, convicted felon, banned from the United States for life. This is normally where the story ends. It's worth stopping here and asking a question that most coverage of El Mencho never seriously explores. Why did he become a police officer? Not as a cover, not because someone told him to. He joined the local force in Jalisco and served for a period that intelligence officials have described as genuinely formative. Not in the moral sense, but in the strategic one. The DEA's assessment of that period, reconstructed from years of investigation, points to something chilling. Mencho didn't wear the uniform because he had to. He wore it because it gave him access to radios, to patrol routes, to the logic of how law enforcement organized itself, communicated, and, most critically, how it could be corrupted. He watched which officers took money. He noted which commanders looked away. He cataloged the pressure points. When he left the force and joined the Milenio Cartel as an enforcer, he wasn't starting from zero. He was applying what he had learned. And unlike most sicarios who move up through violence alone, Mencho moved up through understanding. He knew how the state thought, because he had been briefly part of it. This is what made CJNG different from the cartels that came before it. Sinaloa built its power through trafficking, infrastructure, and political bribery accumulated over decades. CJNG built its power through military-grade violence and institutional intelligence, the kind you can only develop if someone inside the organization once sat on the other side of the table. Mencho never forgot what he learned in that uniform, and the Mexican state would spend the next 2 decades trying to forget that they had once given him the badge. Within a decade of CJNG's founding, it had established a presence in all 50 American states and more than 40 countries. By 2019, the DEA assessed that El Mencho's cartel was moving at least 1/3 of all narcotics entering the United States. His personal net worth, a minimum of $500 million, potentially over $1 billion. The Mexican government estimated CJNG's total combined assets at $50 billion. In February 2025, the Trump administration designated it a foreign terrorist organization. The avocado picker from Michoacan had built a narco empire larger than the economies of most countries. And still, nobody could find him. This is where El Mencho becomes genuinely unlike any other figure in the history of organized crime. El Chapo wanted to be a legend. He gave interviews to Sean Penn in the jungle. He had corridos written about him. He wore his name like a crown. He wanted to be known. El Mencho wanted the opposite. No interviews, no photographs, no public appearances, no vanity. In over a decade as the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere, fewer than 3 confirmed images of him exist. All of them old, all of them low resolution, all of them taken long before anyone understood who he would become. The only time the public ever heard his voice was through leaked audio recordings, expletive-filled messages sent to rivals, threats delivered from a face that nobody could see. Organized crime scholar Edgardo Buscaglia of Columbia University described the strategy plainly. El Mencho's cartel had become one of the largest buyers of politicians in political campaigns in Mexico, which had given it an enormous social base, power without visibility. That was the architecture. He moved constantly through the mountain ranges of Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, and Nayarit. He never stayed in the same location for long. Around him, two rings of security, an inner circle of former military mercenaries, and an outer ring of lookouts spread across the mountain roads, watching for anything that moved. For years, it worked. For years, no government on earth could touch him. Then two things happened that made hiding harder. The first was violence he chose. The second was a disease he didn't. In 2015, El Mencho's men fired a rocket-propelled grenade at a Mexican Army helicopter and blew it out of the sky, buying him time to vanish into the Sierra. 11 years later, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes died aboard a Mexican Army aircraft, being flown to the capital he never reached. The man who used a rocket to escape the Army died on the Army's own plane. There was no escape this time. As early as 2019, Mexican intelligence had confirmed what would become the most consequential secret in the entire investigation. El Mencho was suffering from serious kidney failure. Kidney disease doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care how many soldiers you command, how many governments are afraid of you, or how effectively you've made yourself invisible. It demands treatment, dialysis, medication, regular monitoring, a schedule. And in the mountains of Jalisco, that schedule is extraordinarily difficult to maintain quietly. His solution was to build a private medical facility deep inside CJNG-controlled territory. In the remote village of Elihuatlan, in the municipality of Quitupan, roughly 50 kilometers from the nearest town, a hospital constructed in the mountains for one patient. This was not a safe house. This was infrastructure, and infrastructure leaves traces. As recently as February 2025, Mexico's Secretary of Security publicly confirmed the kidney disease was ongoing and being managed. And here's the question that investigators would have been pulling apart in their classified briefings. Kidney treatment creates a schedule. A schedule creates patterns. Patterns can be tracked. Whether the dialysis schedule was ultimately how they found him has never been officially confirmed. The Mexican Ministry of Defense has not said. The CIA has not said. What has been confirmed is that in the months leading up to February 22, 2026, intelligence assets were closing in on his location with a precision that suggested something had changed in their ability to predict his movements. The irony is almost too precise to be accidental. The only thing keeping El Mencho alive, the machine cleaning his blood, the medication extending his life, the medical routine he could not abandon, was the same thing that may have ended it. He had made himself invisible in every way that a human being can make themselves invisible. But his own body would not disappear with him. June 26, 2020. Mexico City, 7 in the morning. On Reforma Avenue, one of the most famous boulevards in Latin America, flanked by monuments and embassies, and the memory of every important thing that has ever happened in this country, a convoy of CJNG gunmen ambushed Omar Garcia Harfuch, the city's chief of police. Grenades, high-powered rifles, armored vehicles punctured by automatic fire. Garcia Harfuch took 3 bullets. 2 of his bodyguards were killed. A civilian bystander was killed. The attack lasted long enough to leave the avenue looking like a war zone in the middle of the capital. Garcia Harfuch survived. From his hospital bed, still bleeding through his bandages, he posted on Twitter and named CJNG directly. He did not wait. He did not hedge. He named them. He recovered. And he did not forget. By 2026, Omar Garcia Harfuch was Mexico's Secretary of Security, the highest law enforcement position in the country. The man El Mencho had tried to kill on Reforma Avenue 6 years earlier was now the man coordinating the operation designed to find him. When news broke on February 22nd that El Mencho was dead, Garcia Harfuch opened his phone and posted a single line on X. 4 words. Our recognition to the Mexican Army and Air Force. No press conference, no photograph, no speech. Just 4 words and 6 years of waiting compressed into one sentence that said everything by saying almost nothing. There is a version of this story in which El Mencho's greatest strategic mistake was not his kidney disease, not his security lapses, not the intelligence that closed around him in the months before February 2026. His greatest mistake may have been leaving Omar Garcia Harfuch alive. Sunday, February 22nd, 2026. Before sunrise, Totolapan, Jalisco. The Mexican Army Special Forces moved in from multiple directions simultaneously. National Guard units held the outer perimeter. Mexican Air Force assets were overhead. Intelligence personnel from the Attorney General's office were embedded directly in the operation. This was not a raid improvised in the field. This was months of preparation, signals, surveillance, informant reporting, pattern analysis, converging on a single GPS coordinate in the dark. The compound was positioned in the mountains, as all of El Mencho's compounds were, at elevation, with clear sight lines, with multiple escape routes carved into the terrain. It was designed to give him time, enough time to hear the helicopters and disappear before they landed. It had worked before. It had worked in 2015 when a rocket-propelled grenade cleared the airspace and bought him hours in the Sierra. This time they came from too many angles at once. The moment troops breached the perimeter, CJNG fighters opened fire. What followed was a sustained firefight in the mountains above Jalisco. Not a quick arrest, not a clean extraction, but a genuine battle between soldiers and cartel gunmen in the dark. 4 CJNG operatives were killed at the scene, 2 were arrested, 3 others were gravely wounded. Among the wounded, the man the entire operation had been built to find. When the shooting stopped, soldiers moved through the compound. What they found there told the story of what El Mencho had been preparing for years: armored vehicles, rocket launchers capable of bringing down aircraft, heavy weapons stockpiled in the mountains like the arsenal of a small army. He had not been hiding. He had been fortifying. 3 members of the Mexican armed forces were wounded in the exchange, and in the wreckage of the firefight, bleeding, in custody, for the first time in his life, in the hands of the state he had spent decades humiliating. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. For a moment, it appeared that what 12 years of intelligence work, $15 million in bounties, the full resources of the DEA, Interpol, and 2 governments had been building toward, had finally arrived. They had him. They did not have him for long. Standard protocol for a capture of this magnitude is immediate transfer. No delays, no opportunities for a rescue operation, no time for CJNG to mobilize. A military aircraft was prepared. El Mencho, wounded, bleeding, was loaded aboard. The plan was federal custody in Mexico City. Interrogation. The full weight of the Mexican justice system applied to the most significant prisoner the country had ever held. He never arrived. Somewhere above the mountains of Jalisco, en route to the capital, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes died from his wounds. The official statement from Mexico's Ministry of Defense was precise in its language. The objective of the operation had been to capture him alive. That is not what happened. The man who had shot down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade to escape the Mexican Army in 2015 was transported by the Mexican Army's own aircraft in 2026. He didn't make it off the plane. In Mexico City, Omar Garcia Harfuch opened his phone. He typed 4 words: "Our recognition to the Mexican Army and Air Force." No speech, no press conference, no photograph, no triumph performed for the cameras. Just 4 words from the man who had waited 6 years, who had taken 3 bullets on Reforma Avenue and recovered in a hospital bed and gone back to work and climbed to the top of Mexico's security apparatus. All while the man who had ordered the attack on him was still alive somewhere in the mountains. Now he wasn't. Within hours of the news breaking, CJNG activated something that El Mencho had apparently prepared for the possibility of exactly this moment. 21 highway blockades ignited across Jalisco alone by 3 in the afternoon. Vehicles were set on fire across Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, Tamaulipas, Guanajuato, and Aguascalientes. 6 states simultaneously in a coordinated demonstration of organizational reach that no single law enforcement action had managed to suppress. Governor Pablo Lemus Navarro activated a code-red state of emergency. Public transport was suspended. Schools were canceled. Civilians were ordered to stay home. Guadalajara went silent. A city of 5 million people, scheduled to host FIFA World Cup matches in 4 months' time, became a ghost town in an afternoon. Then gunmen entered the international airport. Travelers abandoned their luggage and ran through the terminals. Delta, Alaska, American Airlines, Southwest, and Air Canada canceled all flights to Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. A prison riot broke out in Puerto Vallarta. A jail guard was killed. The U.S. State Department issued a shelter-in-place advisory for American citizens across 5 Mexican states. From Washington, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt confirmed that American intelligence had provided support to the Mexican government in the operation. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau described El Mencho as one of the bloodiest and most ruthless drug kingpins in history, then added, "The good guys are stronger than the bad guys." In Guadalajara, the streets were empty and the fires were still burning. 5 million people were inside their homes, watching their phones, waiting to see how long it would last. The city that was supposed to be hosting one of the great celebrations of global sport in 4 months looked, that night, like a city that had been reminded of what it actually runs on, and who has always had the power to turn the lights off. One man had died, and the price of his death was being paid by everyone who had nothing to do with his life. Go back to 1992, to the courtroom in San Francisco. A 26-year-old man is standing in front of a federal judge. His older brother Abraham is sitting nearby. Abraham already has 2 felony convictions. A third will likely mean life. And Nemesio, who is not a lawyer, not a strategist, not yet anything, makes a calculation. He tells the court to give him the sentence. He absorbs it. He walks into Big Spring Correctional Center so that one person he loves will not spend his life in a cage. That choice, made in a moment, in a room that nobody outside of it would remember for decades, is the seed of everything that followed. CJNG, the $50 billion in assets, the 40 countries, the $15 million bounty, the rocket-propelled grenades, the private hospital in the mountains. All of it grew from a single act of loyalty to an older brother. 33 years later, one of the final moves of the intelligence operation closing around El Mencho was the recapture of that same brother. Abraham Oseguera Cervantes, the man Nemesio had gone to prison to protect, was seized by the Mexican army on February 28, 2025. Almost exactly 1 year before the raid on the compound in Jalisco. Whether his arrest provided intelligence that accelerated the operation against his brother has not been officially confirmed. But the timing is not nothing. The brother he had gone to prison for. The brother whose freedom he had bought with 3 years of his own. The brother who, in the end, could not protect him. He started with nothing. A village with no roads. A 5th-grade education. Avocado fields in Michoacan. He crossed a border 3 times, was deported 3 times, and came back each time because disappearing was not something he knew how to do. He spent 3 years in a West Texas federal prison for his brother. He wore a police uniform and studied the people he would one day destroy. He built an empire that stretched across 40 countries and moved a third of all narcotics entering the United States. He made 2 governments spend a decade and $15 million trying to find him. And at dawn on a Sunday morning in February 2026 in the mountains of Jalisco, it ended the way it always ends for men who refuse to disappear. In a firefight they couldn't escape, on a plane they never got off, above the same mountains where they had once been untouchable. CJNG will not collapse because El Mencho is dead. He built the organization specifically to survive him. Decentralized, regional cells operating with significant autonomy. No single node capable of bringing down the whole. The cartel has operations across 40 countries and 50 American states. Financial infrastructure woven through legitimate economies. And a generation of commanders who learn from the most disciplined criminal organizer in the modern history of the Western Hemisphere. Analysts at the Brookings Institution have been direct. A tremendous amount of violence is likely to follow. Not because the cartel is weak, but because the vacuum left by a leader of El Mencho's stature will attract every ambitious operator within the organization's structure. One name has begun appearing in intelligence reports as a potential successor. Abraham Jesus Amaro Cano, known as El Yogurt, 29 years old, commands a CJNG Special Forces cell linked directly to El Mencho's personal protection unit. Survived a major Mexican Navy raid in 2025. Not confirmed, but the name being spoken quietly in the places where these things are spoken. President Claudia Sheinbaum had said for years that the kingpin strategy doesn't work, that cutting off the head of a cartel doesn't kill the body. it multiplies it. She said it before she took office. She built her security philosophy around that belief. And then, under pressure from the Trump administration to produce visible results, she authorized the operation that produced the biggest kingpin kill in the history of the Western Hemisphere. On the night of February 22nd, 2026, she watched her own warning come true in real time on every screen in the country. The question is not what happened to El Mencho. We know what happened to El Mencho. The question, the one that nobody can answer yet, is what the space he left behind will become, and who will fill it, and how many people will die in the process of finding out. In a bar in San Francisco in 1992, a 26-year-old man looked at a stack of bills that were too clean and knew immediately that something was wrong. He told his brother to walk away. It was already too late. 33 years later, in the mountains of Jalisco, the same thing was true.